Good morning. Welcome to episode 29 of Tea, Coffee, and Torah. I'm glad to have you with me this morning, and I have appreciated all your interaction and all of your comments, so please keep them coming. This morning I have something fun because we are looking at the scholarship of the prophets and how they cited older text, how they cited ancient text. And this morning, we're going to see that in detail. So I hope you were able to find, I did post earlier, a brand new chart that you can either print out or you can just have handy on your screen and follow along. I will be posting it in comments today as for when you come back and you look at this video again, you'll be able to see it in the comments. Now, I have been using Jeremiah 32:21 as the basis of our study because it is a very late text. And this late text shows how ardent, how widespread scholarship was in Israel and how it really lasted for the entire monarchy period. It really begins probably during the Judges era, and it continues all the way through the end of the monarchy. But then even afterwards, Ezra and Nehemiah will eventually see that there is scholarship that they use in those books as well. So it becomes really a standard of scholarship that is used in ancient Israel for everything that we read in the Old Testament or Tanakh. So this morning we're building on the concepts of out of Egypt, what Yahweh swore to your fathers. Those are the two main concepts. There's actually another one, but I see that it got cut off. So we'll come back to that one a little bit later. The other one was brought you out of the land of Egypt. So it was a little bit, actually, no, I did keep it. It says, this land which you swore to your fathers. So Yahweh swore this land to Israel's fathers. That is the third phrase that we're looking at. So the first one is out of Egypt. The second is your people Israel, some sort of reference to Israel. And then the land which God or Yahweh swore to Israel's forefathers. And all of these concepts are found in Jeremiah 32:21. But we're going to see that they continue to be built upon throughout the books of Joshua and Judges, and that's what we're going to look at. If you look at Joshua 24, verses 5 and 6, it talks about Yahweh bringing Israel or bringing Israel's fathers out of the land of Egypt. That's the very first cell that we have. Oh, let me also say, this time I found that it worked because the document is not as long. It worked better to print it in landscape. And then I stitched it together in leaves again. And again, it is still 3 leaves. So that's how it worked today. So in Joshua 24, verses 6 through 8, we also have the idea of the plagues. Yahweh put darkness between Israel and the Egyptians at the crossing of the Red Sea. And that may not be a technical plague, but it was a continuation of another plague that occurred in Egypt where Egypt experienced darkness previously. But then you find that instead of saying signs and wonders, which really becomes a formula for a reference to the Israel among Israel's scribes, in Joshua 24, it's referred to a little bit differently. It says, and your eyes saw what I did in Egypt. So this is a different type of reference, still the same concept, but a different type of reference. And then it says, you dwelt in the wilderness a long time. Well, 40 years is obviously a very long time. So notice that this text is very reflective. It reflects upon an original experience. It reflects upon original sources. So I'm going to go ahead and just read this text in its entirety. It says, and I brought your fathers out of the land of Egypt, and you came to the sea, and the Egyptians pursued your fathers with chariots and horsemen to the Red Sea. So they cried out to Yahweh, and he put darkness between you and the Egyptians, and brought the sea upon them and covered them. And your eyes saw what I did in Egypt. Then you dwelt in the wilderness a long time. So again, this text is very reflective. It is written in first person. It is directly addressing a people. And I am competing with some lovely birds this morning. I think they have a nest right up here in my in my ceiling. So it's a lot of fun. Lots of birds out this morning. So this is actually Joshua 24, 6 through 8. Now we're going to go back a little bit to Joshua chapter 5, and I think this is verses 5 and 6. And I'm just going to go ahead and read this. For the children of Israel walked 40 years in the wilderness. Again, we have this idea of a long time, 40 years in the wilderness, till all the people of the men of war were come out of Egypt. So here again, we have this phrase, come out of Egypt, which really refers to the entire Exodus experience. Until the men of war were consumed because they obeyed not the voice of Yahweh, to whom Yahweh swore that he would not show them the land, which Yahweh swore unto their forefathers. Excuse me. A little dry out this morning. So again, we have this consistent idea that Yahweh has sworn to Israel's forefathers. They've come out of the land of Egypt. And then we have the phrase that also occurs in Joshua of a land that flows with milk and honey. So this is very consistent. It shows that they're working from original sources. And as we saw last time, those original sources come from Exodus, and then later Deuteronomy, with some stitches also occurring in Numbers and Leviticus. But this is all very consistent. There's no contradiction. The concepts are the same. Now, I want to bring attention to this phrase, men of war, because as we saw last time, Exodus 7:4, Exodus 12:17, and 51, as well as Deuteronomy 4:34, also talk about armies or garrisons and war in the land of Egypt. And this is really, Joshua is reiterating this concept. So this really kind of changes a little bit, the traditional, I think, ideas that we approach the Exodus with, because Israel had armies in Egypt. They very likely worked under Pharaoh, under his corvée labor. And we know this from other, Second Intermediate text and New Kingdom text, that this is the way Egypt indeed organized its forces. And it used conscripted, sometimes they were mercenaries, sometimes they were responsible for guarding a particular area within the land of Egypt, but they would have served under the Pharaoh. And it's very likely too that these forces definitely would have had more Egyptian names, and they may even have been more Egyptianized than the rest of Israel's forces. At least that's one theory. Now, turn with me to Joshua 24. We're going back to Joshua 24. We're going to look a little bit earlier in verse 5. It says, and I sent Moses and also Aaron, and I plagued. The word here is nagaf, which is literally means to spite. I struck Egypt according to all that I did among, and afterwards I brought you out. So again, there's this idea of Israel coming out of Egypt. But what's interesting here is that we don't find what later became this formal formula. Or I'm not going to say it's later. What I'm going to say is it was probably within the formal scholars or the formal scribes who worked directly under Moses and Joshua. They are the ones that use this phrase, signs and wonders, and really use more formatic phrases to refer to the Exodus. We don't find that in Joshua, which leads me to, or at least in strains in Joshua, which leads me to the conclusion that Joshua very likely was the author of this portion of Joshua, and not a scribe working under him or a scribe working under Moses. Because we also find that in other references, this word for smite, for the plagues, that's used in Exodus 8:2, 12:23, and verse 27, as well as Exodus 21:2 and 35. So when you have a different word, and as a very more specific word being used for plagues in Egypt, it's very possible that this does show an original thread or an original strain of something that Joshua actually wrote that is retained in the scriptures that we have today. And again, this does not undermine the fact that there were other scribes writing under Moses. I think that when we put all of our eggs in one basket, and what do we know historically? When a text is written by only one person, its credibility can be undermined. But when you have different scribes, as would have happened in Egypt, writing underneath the leader, and these would have been the people in the army, your highest ranking officials in the army, it definitely leads credence to the text. So now we're going to spend the rest of the time on Judges 2 verses 1 and 4. And we may not get through all of this morning, because this text, more than anything, shows very, very early scholarship in Israel. It shows how Israel's scribes at the time quoted from older sources, how they referred to them, and how they used those sources as justification for a present day situation that was occurring at that time. So for some reason, in at least how it printed out for me, the top line is a little bit, it goes underneath the title a little bit, but hopefully you can still read it. So grab your Bible if you have one. Look at Judges 2 verses 1 through 4. It says, and then the angel of Yahweh came up from Gilgal to Bochim. And Bochim there is weeping. We're going to talk about Shechem and Gilgal a little bit, because one of the questions is, how did the tabernacle get moved from Shechem to Shiloh? And we're going to talk about this, not today, but probably next time, because this gets a little bit interesting. It says, and I led you up out from Egypt and brought you to the land that I swore to your fathers. So again, I ran out of time this morning, and I'll go back and re-upload this document, because it shows that this concept of Israel coming up out of the land of Egypt, and again, this concept of the land which Yahweh swore to Israel's forefathers, something that is reflected in Jeremiah. Throughout the Exodus and Deuteronomy narratives, that concept is constantly reiterated. Now, it also says in Judges 2, verses 1 through 4, and I said, I will never break my covenant with you. So where does this concept of Yahweh never breaking his covenant with Israel come from? Well, I want to share with you a few texts, and I do have them in parentheses in that quote in that section for Judges. But these are the texts that refer to Yahweh never breaking his covenant. We find the first one is with Noah, the Noahic covenant in Genesis 9:12. And God said, for this is the token of the covenant that I make between me and you and every living creature that is with you. It is a perpetual covenant for all generations. This is an everlasting covenant, a covenant that Yahweh cannot break. Or in this case, it's specifically a reference to Elohim. But we'll get into those discussions later. I'm just wanting to set the groundwork right now, and we'll come back later. It says, and the bow shall be in the cloud, and you will look upon, or I will look upon it, that I may remember the everlasting covenant between Elohim and every living creature of the flesh that is upon the earth. So again, this is the idea that God's covenant is everlasting. Now, what we find is that the covenant that Yahweh made with Noah is later incorporated into the Israelite covenant. Every aspect is there. And not one covenant do you ever find, does God ever rescind? Does he ever change? Or does he ever do away with a previous covenant? Rather, those covenants are always rolled into a subsequent covenant, and they build one upon the other. So another text that talks about an everlasting covenant, a covenant that God cannot break. Genesis 13 verses 14 through 17. Yahweh said to Abraham, after that Lot was separated from him, lift up your eyes now and look to the place where you are, northward, southward, eastward, and westward. For all this land that you see, I will give it to you and to your seed forever. And I will make your seed as the dust of the earth, so that a man can number the dust of the earth. Only then shall your seed be numbered. So again, we have this idea of an eternal covenant, an everlasting covenant, a covenant which God cannot break. And we really find that this Judges text actually kind of clarifies an understanding of what a everlasting or eternal covenant is. In the Hebrew, it is olam. age ending, but it's really not age ending. It's the idea that it continues on for ages and ages. If we skip down to Genesis 17, verses 7 and 8, I will establish my covenant between them and me and their seed after me, or after them in their generations, as an everlasting covenant, to be a God unto you and your seed after you. And I will give to you and to your seed after you the land where you are a stranger in the land of Canaan for an everlasting possession. Now, this is reiterated again in Exodus as we come into the making of a nation. Exodus 31, verses 16 and 17. Wherefore the children of Israel shall keep the Sabbath, to observe the Sabbath throughout their generations for a perpetual covenant. For it is a sign between me and the children of Israel forever. For in 6 days Yahweh made heaven and earth, and on the seventh day he rested, and he was refreshed. This last one, Exodus 32, verse 13. Remember Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, your servants, to whom you swear by your own self, and said to them, I will multiply your seed as the stars of heaven, and all this land I have spoken I will give to your seed, and they shall inherit. Now, this text is really, really interesting, because when you look at Exodus 32:13, where it says, this land which you said you swore by yourself, when you go back to Exodus 15 and Yahweh makes his covenant with Abraham, you do indeed find that Yahweh says, I swear by myself. And he swears by Yahweh myself. And he makes that covenant with Israel. So we are working with primary sources that have been compiled into the documents that we have today. They constantly reflect on and cite the older citations and older sources. And this is an example of scholarship. So then when we come into Judges 2, verses 1 through 4, we find that Israel's scribes are quoting from previous documents. They are using scholarships. Now, and next time, actually, you know what? We'll finish this one. In verse 2, in Judges, it says, and you shall make no covenant with the inhabitants of this land. And you find that this stipulation, this instruction, or this judgment is given in Exodus 23, verse 32, and Deuteronomy 7, verse 2. And then the concept that is added to this is that you shall tear down their altars. So you find that these concepts are consistently reiterated. First, from what would have been original sources from scribes written under the hand of Moses, and then later quoted and referred to by later scribes as Israel's history unfolds. So let's look at a few of these texts that talk about making no covenant with the inhabitants of the land. The first one is Exodus 23, verses 31 through 33. And I will set your bounds from the Red Sea, even unto the sea of the Philistines, and to the desert unto the river. And I will deliver the inhabitants of the land into your hand, and you shall drive them out before you. You shall make no covenant with them, nor their gods. And they shall not dwell in your land, lest they make you sin against me. Or if you serve the gods, it will surely be a snare unto you. Now, the formal judgment it's really out of place, because the formal judgment that is given occurs in Numbers 33, verses 50 through 55. I refer to this as the effacement judgment, because it commands Israel to efface the memory, the evidence of the Canaanites, whether that be the Philistines or the Hivites or the Hittites or whatever people existed before Israel, to erase their memory on the land. And this is really done for political reasons. When you erase a people's memory to the land, when you erase their evidence to that land, it becomes easier to subvert them. It becomes easier to control that land, because the people's ties to that land are severed. And then you are indeed able to rise up in their stead, and you are able to occupy that land and to have less, theoretically, less conflict over the ties that people feel to a homeland, because really it's no longer their homeland. Everything that made it home to them no longer exists, and now you are there in their stead. So this is something that is done politically. When we look at Deuteronomy 7 verses 2 through 5, it says, "And when Yahweh your God shall deliver them before you, you shall smite them and utterly destroy them. You shall make no covenant with them." So this is again probably a text that Judges is quoting from. "And you shall show no mercy to them. Neither shall you make marriages with them. Your daughters shall not be given to his son, or your daughters take unto your son. And for they will turn away your son from following me, that they may serve other gods. So the anger of Yahweh will be kindled against you and destroy you suddenly. But this is how you shall deal with them. You shall destroy their altars, break down their images, and cut down their groves, and burn their images with fire." So we are going to get into this concept, this idea of tearing down their altars, tearing down their images, and we're going to delve more into the effacement judgment of Numbers 33, verses 50 through 55 next time. I am trying to keep these short. I don't want these to become too much at one time, but I hope you'll join me for episode 30 as we delve into the effacement judgment and we see how these ideas are consistent throughout Scripture. They're not changed. The concepts, and that's really what I'm looking at, the concepts are very, very strong. And there is a strong thread where they are reiterated. And sometimes it is the exact same words and the exact same phrases. So please join me next time. I appreciate you being with me this morning. And I hope that you will have a fantastic weekend. Shalom.